Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. The public is waiting to see the exact charges against former President Trump. What does it actually mean that the indictment is sealed? We're happy to have our next guest, former U.S. Assistant Attorney General Jeff Clark. Jeff Clark, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Jeff, as a legal matter, if you could just help us sort of understand the charges or the potential charges and how we actually got to this point.
Well, Steve, I think that first thing I have to say is we haven't seen the charges, right? We have been told that an indictment was handed down by the Manhattan grand jury as requested by their district attorney, Alvin Bragg. But we haven't seen the particulars. There have been leaks like, oh, there are 30 plus counts in it. We know that it involves the Stormy Daniels issue, but we haven't seen it precisely. And, so I can't comment on it particularly, but I think it's a serious issue that we haven't seen it. What is the conceivable rationale for issuing an announcement that an indictment has been handed down on a Thursday and then having an arraignment on Tuesday? It's as if, will the Republic fall? Will New York City collapse if the public knows 5 days or so in advance of the arraignment tomorrow what the charges are? I mean, it's ludicrous. I really want to see once the seal is lifted on the indictment exactly what the rationale was for this delay. It seems like it's trying to put President Trump in a box of being, tried by ambush, essentially. Now, maybe his lawyers have been given an under seal copy of that indictment. At least I hope so. That's what due process requires, and Sixth Amendment or Sixth Amendment equivalent rights in New York State under their Constitution require. But, President Trump should be able to take his case to the people. His lawyers should be able to speak out about the indictment before the arraignment tomorrow. But clearly, some kind of decision was made to try to, muffle President Trump. And we're also hearing that the judge may impose a gag order on President Trump, which would not just gag him from talking about this case, which I think is problematic under the First Amendment in and of itself, but would, block him from speaking during a critical time of the campaign for 2024, the presidential election.
Jeff, you raise a lot of interesting points. If you could tell us a little bit more about the sealing of this indictment, how common is this, and ultimately, what does it, what purpose does it serve in your opinion?
Well, look, the only thing I had seen on this was Ari Melber actually flashing up, a one-page order indicating that Alvin Bragg could, publicly indicate that an indictment had been handed down. But it was clear from looking at that order that there was some briefing behind it. And so I want to see that briefing, and I want to be able to assess once I see it, assuming it does get unsealed at some point and at some point in the near future, what was the rationale, and then test it so that everyone should be able to, criticize that. It's just, there's too much government going on by secret, Steve, at this point. I mean, my understanding is that still the full affidavit for the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago, for instance, hasn't been released. So, and we just hear, leak after leak. Now there are leaks about, there's a new obstruction angle on the Mar-a-Lago documents case that the special counsel, Jack Smith, is looking at. First of all, those leaks shouldn't be occurring. And second of all, it's, kind of unilateral disarmament for President Trump. He doesn't see everything. The other side can, and the other side can, and, they can strategically release new pieces of information when they want to. I think it's, can I make a classics reference, Steve? I mean, there was a senator in Rome, Cato the Censor, who was famous for sort of ending all of his speeches, and this is the shortened version, with Carthago delenda est, and therefore Carthage must be destroyed. I think that, would that we had senators in the U.S. ending all of their speeches with that as to the Chinese Communist Party. But I think what's going on here in terms of all these efforts in cities and federally is a kind of motto of, Trump delenda est. Trump must be destroyed. Get Trump. That's the the unifying theme.
Yeah, Jeff, a lot of people have raised the eerie similarities to the fall of Rome when they look at a lot of what we're seeing happen right now. If I could ask you, Jeff, what will happen during this preliminary conference hearing that we're going to see tomorrow, and just from a logistical standpoint?
Well, I think we're going to learn whether President Trump's lawyers have seen a copy of the indictment. Otherwise, if they haven't, it would have to be read out. And then, I think we've been told already that the president will enter a plea of not guilty. The other thing is maybe we'll see a gag order imposed, or maybe we'll see argument reported between lawyers from Alvin Bragg's office and lawyers for President Trump about whether to impose such a gag order. I mean, I think those are the two most important things. Well, I should say a third, which is obviously if they unseal the indictment tomorrow, then we'll be able to see, we'll be able to analyze the charges, and we'll be able to see if they have defects. And in particularity, right? A lot of, it's been an interesting dance I've been watching. If I watch MSNBC and CNN, every time some defender of President Trump, or even, some Republican who's not particularly a supporter of President Trump, attacks the indictment, moderators, et cetera, quickly push back and say, well, we haven't seen the indictment. Well, but Steve, whose problem is that, right? Alvin Bragg, apparently asked for the indictment to be held under seal at least through tomorrow. But, I don't see what the rationale for that is. So it's just very convenient to me that, we're being kept in the dark about the precise parameters of the indictment.
Now, I know this is highly speculative, but how might former President Trump respond to this indictment and the subsequent proceeding from the court? Does he plea for something small to put this in the rearview mirror and move on, or does he risk fighting it, do you think?
Well, what I'm seeing in the press, are very strong indications that, President Trump doesn't think that he did anything wrong at all. He denies what has been leaked. And, obviously this is something that's been floating around for 5 years publicly, and then, goes back several years before that. So, his lawyers are basically telling the American people, not to expect that President Trump would take a plea deal here.
Jeff, you mentioned the slings and arrows that are being tossed around at the former president. You have what's going on with the documents case. You have this case. You also have the cases in Georgia. I just want to get your thoughts as to where you see those might be heading.
Well, I think there's a problem in the Georgia issue because of, frankly, the I think mentally unstable woman who was the jury foreperson down there, and her very strange, giggly comments and her social media history. And I think that, that's one reason why something that the district attorney down there, Fani Willis, seems to be behind schedule. She'd promised something imminent. And, we obviously don't know exactly what the definition of imminent is. Steve, it depends on, what is the meaning of imminent. But I think that there's kind of trouble with that case because of how the special grand jury process unfolded. Now it's moved over to an ordinary grand jury, because that's the kind of grand jury under Georgia law that would actually need to approve of an indictment and vote it as a true bill. I think that the revelations that came out of the jury foreperson and other jurors who've since spoken to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution create significant federal due process issues for that prosecution. And I would expect that if that does issue at some point, that those will become front and center of any defense of President Trump.
Jeff, I have to say it surely appears that Operation Mockingbird is in full effect. When you mention the stations that you're turning on, the pundits across mainstream media all seem to be uttering the same talking points, which is the law is the law, nobody is above the law. What do you say to these talking points that have been put on blast?
Well, I mean, no one should be above the law, but I do think that this, let's just start with the New York, the Manhattan issue, right? Their allegation apparently is going to be that it had something to do with the 20 2016 presidential campaign. And so that means, President Trump being geared up to hold and gearing himself up to take federal office. In that kind of, situation, to have a local prosecutor reach back and try, years later, potentially in excess of the statute of limitations. Let's see how they plead that tomorrow in the indictment if it gets unsealed. To reach back to that for a local prosecutor, it's like setting up a local prosecutor as having a veto right over who gets to run successfully for president. And that's an inversion of our federal system. Under the federal Constitution, the U.S. Constitution is supreme over state and local law, not the other way around. And I think that if we see these kinds of prosecutions take place, we're seeing a very dangerous development, because we may see red state local prosecutors go after Democrat presidents, just a kind of free-for-all battle of local prosecutors trying to make themselves be more effective on the national stage, put their names out there on the national stage. That's not the way the system's supposed to work. Congress, the House now may want to start considering a remedy for out-of-control local prosecutors. I've seen some argue that that would be inconsistent with our constitutional doctrine of federalism, but I don't think so. I think President Trump is being denied his basic due process and equal protection rights, and those rights are guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment is something that Congress can, in Section 5 of it, use to provide remedies and to override the unconstitutional actions of state or local actors.
Former Acting Assistant Attorney General Jeff Clark, really appreciate your perspective.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Great to be here.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.